A woman had begun to perform dark magic against someone chosen, but the Lord their God had already seen every hidden move, and he was stepping in with divine authority. She had whispered their name in shadowed corners, ignited candles with wicked intentions, and wrapped cords, etched symbols, buried cursed objects, and spoken evil decrees, all because she envied what God himself had placed inside that soul. She saw divine favor and sought to corrupt it with misfortune. She recognized light and tried to dim it. Her desire was to silence laughter, delay blessings, and derail a heavenly destiny. But the Lord would not allow it. That woman had no clue who she was rising against. She believed her rituals were concealed. She assumed that the darkness she summoned could overpower a child of God. But the Lord of Heaven's armies had already marked that one as his own. They were sealed with his name. Every single spell she launched was now colliding violently with the consuming fire of his presence. And that soul. They felt it. The exhaustion that lingered without explanation. The cloud weighing heavily on the mind. Roadblocks rising for no reason. Strange dreams. Unseen pressure in the spiritual realm. It was not in their imagination. That was not random coincidence. That was warfare. But they were told not to fear, because God had already begun the rescue. She had tried to manipulate the spirit realm, but she had forgotten a sacred truth: the Lord is the creator of all things, and nothing happens unless he allows it. She may have chanted words under the veil of night, but heaven had heard every syllable. While she worked her darkness, the Lord was already dispatching his angels to shield the one she targeted. Divine warriors had been sent directly to their doorstep. Though the human eyes saw none of it, in the spirit, fierce battles had already been fought, and the chosen one was still standing because the Lord had built a wall of protection around them. The time had come to listen closely, for the message was urgent. The Lord wasn't merely blocking the attacks, he was reversing them. Every curse aimed toward that child of destiny was being sent back. Every trap she laid out, she herself would now fall into. The same darkness she conjured to cloak the chosen's future was now falling heavily over her own plans. But this wasn't because God hated her. No, this was because no one touches God's anointed and walks away unchanged. And then came the deeper truth: the battle wasn't just about her. It was always about the calling. That soul carried something powerful. That was the reason for the spiritual ambush. That one was a light in a dark generation. Their prayers shook atmospheres. Their very presence carried the glory of God. Hell trembled the moment they opened their eyes each morning. That woman had been used by the enemy to stop what heaven had placed on the inside, but she had failed. Yes, pain came. Yes, weakness was felt. Yes, there were moments where giving up seemed like the only option. But they didn't quit. They kept moving forward. They wept, but they prayed. They questioned, but they clung to the Lord. And now, heaven had declared, the darkness is lifting. The curse is broken. The season of hidden attacks is ending. The Lord was now calling that soul to stand up in faith. To lift their head high. To stop walking like a victim, because heaven had already crowned them a victor. They were being told to stop fearing the curse and start speaking the blessing. To boldly declare the promises of God. For every time they proclaimed his word aloud, light entered their atmosphere. The entire spiritual frequency shifted. Confusion filled the enemy's camp. The woman who had tried to ruin them was about to witness something she never expected: elevation. Divine promotion was coming, and it would not be hidden. The Lord was preparing to bless his child in public. And not just any public space, in front of those who tried to break them. Yes, even in the presence of enemies, the Lord was setting a table. A feast of favor. A banquet of undeniable grace. And those who watched with confusion would see that someone was walking with God. They would see that person's favor grow and come to recognize, without question, that someone walked with the living God. But this was never just about physical blessings. The Lord was moving spiritually, too. That anxiety that had gripped the soul. He was lifting it. That strange heaviness sitting on their chest like a shadow. He was burning it away with holy fire. The fear that haunted their sleep. It was being chased out by the peace of God. For too long, they had lived under an invisible pressure, an oppression that stole clarity and drained strength. But it ended now. The Holy Spirit had been dispatched to flood their home. Heavenly angels stood posted at every door. Demonic presences, once lingering, had begun to flee, because the glory of God was returning to that sacred space. There was no longer any reason to fear the woman and her rituals. No need to fear her chants, her curses, or her symbols. She held no true authority. That authority had been broken the moment Jesus rose from the dead. And the resurrection power that shattered the grave now lived in that chosen one. So the question stood, what could darkness do when light walks in? That person was not cursed. They were called. They were not weak. They carried warrior blood in their veins. The Lord had formed them in a secret place and planted divine gifts deep within them, gifts that no witchcraft could ever remove or silence. And now, the time had come for those gifts to awaken. Their spiritual senses were beginning to stir. Their dreams would return with supernatural clarity. Their voice would carry holy fire. Their prayers would make demons flee in terror. Because the Lord was no longer simply protecting them, He was now activating them. This was the turning point. What had been sent to stop them would now become the very thing that launched them forward. The woman's attempt to drown them in darkness had actually pushed them closer to divine light. Every attack had sharpened their spiritual discernment. Every wound had strengthened their resolve. And now, they were rising, not merely as a survivor, but as a child of power. They were not alone. Not for a moment. The Lord had been with that soul through every silent tear. In the darkness of midnight, when no one else noticed, He had been whispering to their spirit. They had felt the tug, gentle yet persistent, on their heart, drawing them closer. That was not imagination. That was the voice of the Almighty. He was jealous for them, not in the way of human insecurity, but in the holy longing of a father who refused to let darkness hold his beloved hostage any longer. That soul belonged to Him. They were His. And so, the instruction from heaven was clear, do not look back. Don't dwell on the pain. Don't relive the wound. What had happened, had happened. But the Lord was already writing a new chapter, one saturated with redemption, filled with restoration, and bursting with promises too great to yet imagine. Very soon, they would witness blessings overflow, not because they had earned them through striving, but because the Lord was good. Because He had made a covenant with them. Because He never lies. Because He never fails. And so, the message rang out with clarity, this is their moment of deliverance. They would not leave this season the same way they entered it. The pain, the confusion, the setbacks born from that woman's dark prayers, all of it was being undone. The Lord Himself was rewriting their story, sentence by sentence, with power and redemption. Every mark of manipulation was being blotted out, and in its place, the Spirit of God was being poured like fresh oil. That woman had tried to close doors in the Spirit. But heaven was now opening new ones that no one could shut. She tried to bury their confidence under fear, but the Lord was now resurrecting their boldness. They would walk into rooms with a new kind of authority, not because they were perfect, but because they carried His name. That soul was God's child, and He protects what belongs to Him. The reminder came with power, they were chosen, they were set apart, and they were hidden beneath the shadow of His wings. He went before them in battle. He stood behind them as their rear guard. And when the enemy came in like a flood, the Lord Himself lifted up a standard against him. That woman hadn't just come after a person, she had come against the one who stood behind them. And now, she would be forced to back down. The spiritual warfare had been relentless, but a shift was taking place. The Lord was not only shielding His child, He was now placing spiritual weapons into their hands. Discernment was being activated, allowing them to see beyond the surface. Prophetic dreams were being stirred to expose the hidden. Wisdom was flowing like a river, divine insight that could not be deceived. From this point forward, they would no longer be manipulated. They would no longer second-guess their own spirit. The voice of the Lord would ring with clarity. And he would guide their every step. The woman's power was now draining. Her rituals, ineffective. Her altars were collapsing. Her influence was breaking. The fire of the Lord was stronger than her incense. His word was greater than her chants. His blood covered that chosen one, and that blood spoke louder than every curse the woman had ever whispered in darkness. Some might wonder, why did God let this happen? But the answer came with sacred authority. He allowed it to reveal their strength. They had no idea how powerful they were until they had to pray through the warfare. They hadn't realized how deeply rooted they were in the Lord until the storm came and they did not fall. Yes, the fire had come, but not to destroy. It came to refine, to purify, to awaken, to transform. They were not broken. They were battle-tested. And from that day forward, the Lord declared he was releasing justice on behalf of his chosen one. Where their name had been slandered, he would bring forth truth. Where they had been isolated, he would surround them with divine connections. Where peace had been stolen, he would pour out unspeakable joy. Everything the enemy meant for evil, God was turning it for their good. The season of silence was over. They would speak again, sing again, dream again. That spiritual heaviness, the one that had sat on their chest like a weight, suffocating their vision, was being lifted. They were told to breathe deeply. That was freedom. That was the presence of the Lord. From that day forward, they would speak boldly. No more shrinking back. No more hesitation. They were to declare God's promises, pray in faith, anoint their homes, anoint their doorposts. They were to walk through their space with holy authority and tell every demonic presence, "You have no place here. I belong to Jesus." And the atmosphere would shift, because the woman who worked her rituals did it in secret, but God would now bless his child in public. Their life was about to become a testimony to everyone watching, that God defends his children. And here came the part that would shock their enemies. God was not just restoring what had been lost. He was giving double. Double peace. Double joy. Double doors. So much favor would pour out that they would forget the bitterness of the past season. Rooms once thick with pressure would now be filled with supernatural peace. They would wake up refreshed instead of drained. Delays would become sudden breakthroughs. That was the Lord. That was what it looked like when he broke the power of witchcraft and released the fullness of his spirit. There was no more reason to carry fear. The war was over. The verdict was settled. And the final word was clear: they were free. Free to rise. Free to walk in purpose. Free to believe again. Free to love again. Free to dream again without fear of sabotage. God had placed a hedge of protection around them, and no hex, curse, or spell could penetrate it. And to the woman who had done it, there was one final command. Pray for her. Not out of anger, but out of mercy. Because when someone touches God's chosen, they touch the apple of his eye. She needed deliverance. She needed healing. And just as the Lord had shown mercy to his child, they were now to pray for her, not for her power to return, but for her soul to be restored. For judgment belongs to the Lord, and he always brings truth to light. But that chosen one, they were to focus forward. Their life was not cursed. It was consecrated. Set apart for something greater. And now that they had seen how deep the warfare could go, they were ready to walk in a greater anointing. They would now minister to others who were under spiritual attack. They would speak light into dark places. They would lead others out of confusion and into clarity. Because the Lord didn't just rescue them. He had commissioned them. His Spirit was now resting upon them. The oil of deliverance flowed through their hands. Their words carried healing. Their prayers carried weight. They were no longer in survival mode. They were in revival mode. So rise, warrior. Lift your head. The worst was behind. And the best was ahead. What the enemy meant for destruction, God had turned into a divine setup. They were about to walk into rooms where doors were once shut. They were about to receive favor from unexpected places. Their enemies would scatter. Their purpose would gather momentum like never before. This wasn't hype, this wasn't emotion, this was prophetic confirmation. The chains were broken, the magic was powerless, the season had shifted, the gates of hell had not prevailed. Now walk in victory. Live in purpose. Speak with boldness. And never forget, no darkness can withstand the God who lives within them. He is for them. He is with them. He has already won this war.